StreamYard link open, and then that will save us from hearing our voices twice. So welcome to the stream, Pastor Stephen.
Hello, it's very nice to see you. I saw this kind of come up on a feed, and I said to my wife, so I don't know how long I join you for. I said, I'm feeling really tired.
Okay,
and my wife, I've left her in the other room. So, but thank you for what you said, and thank you for telling me how to get on. I didn't know how to get on. I heard this double feedback as well, and I was thinking, this
not
is
a problem.
very annoying.
You've managed to navigate through that, so that's wonderful. How are you, first of all, Pastor Stephen?
I'm well. I'm very well, thank you. It's very nice to see you guys again. I don't know you, Ijaz, so hello.
That's okay. Hello to you too.
The others are friends from a while ago back in London. I'm no longer in London, as they know, but it's nice to join you this evening.
So, Pastor Stephen, we've been doing these Historicity streams now for probably close to nearly 2 years now. And we've started from the very earliest Gospels in the Bible, and we've gone through them right the way. Now we're into Revelation. We've already done part 1. We're now doing part 2. I don't know if you've heard much of the stream so far, and whether you have any comments about that, or if you would like us to just formulate roughly what we've been saying, then you can obviously come back. Either way, whatever you prefer.
I heard the first bit. So the first bit, I'm now on the computer. I must admit, I saw the first bit on my phone, and so while I was switching from phone to computer, there was a little bit I missed. I did hear Ijaz talk about the historicity of the Bible. I'm not an expert on it, but I have preached on it. I preached on it about 3 times. The first time I probably did a bad job. The second time I probably did a bad job. The third time I did a little bit better. So I do know some of those things. I guess I would like to come back to Ijaz on some of those things, if I may.
Please do.
So just in terms of like the church fathers, I didn't know the book that you were referring to and who you were quoting from. It just so happened that at the moment I'm reading this book. I don't know whether you can see that.
Post-Millennialism and Eschatology of Pope by Keith E. Matheson. Yep.
Yeah.
Familiar with it.
So he's there's various views, and I've got another book here which is similar case for historic Christianity, and that's by
Craig Blomberg. Yeah.
They take
Very
different.
well-known book.
Yeah, they both take different views on the millennium, which is a phrase that is particularly used or only used in Revelation 20. And so there's Christians of differing views in the world today, and they take different views.
Post-millenarian, millenarian. Yep.
Yeah, that's right. But interestingly, I mean, both of them do quote church fathers, and so in debating, like in-house, as it were, as they debate one another, they are saying, well, what was the opinion of the church fathers? So both of them acknowledge that the church fathers do comment on the book of Revelation. So if I may, just on a few, for example, you've got, let's go to Papias, who would be, he's about the year 60 to 130. We don't have any extant manuscripts from him. That means we don't have any existing manuscripts from him. But there are other authors that comment on what he wrote. So, I mean, they don't necessarily comment that favorably on what he wrote, but they comment nonetheless on what he wrote. So Eusebius, who is obviously very famous, and Ijaz would know him. Eusebius, in his ecclesiastical history, I'll give you the reference. It's 3.39.11. So 3.39.11. He refers to Papias, and he says that basically Papias's view of millenarianism was bizarre. So he disagrees with Papias, but the very fact is that he comments on the fact that as early as, I say, as 60 to 130, Papias was writing on the millennium, and the millennium was a phrase that is unique to Revelation. So there's evidence even as early as Papias there and Eusebius. You've got Justin Martyr, who is also very famous.
Mm-hmm.
He lived around 100 to 165. Again, he also comments on the millennium. And one of the clearest statements I'm quoting here, one of the clearest statements indicating the lack of consensus on the doctrine of the millennium in the patristic era may be found in Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho. In response to Trypho's question about a future millennial kingdom, Justin writes, "I admitted to you formerly that I and many others are of this opinion and believe that such will take place, as you are assuredly aware. But on the other hand, I signified to you that many who belong to the pure and pious faith are true Christians, think otherwise. But I and others who are right-minded Christians on all points are assured that there will be a resurrection of the dead and 1,000 years in Jerusalem, which will then be built, adorned and enlarged as prophets Ezekiel and Isaiah and others declare." That's chapter 80. So Justin Martyr is saying, look, there's discussion going on as early as, let's say, these 100 to 165. There's clear discussion going on. Other Christians are debating it. Christians, even at that time, are falling into two different opinions on where they stand. Now, I actually disagree with Justin's view. I'm probably of the opposite view to him on that. But again, the reference back to Justin in his dialogue with Trypho indicates that there is discussion going on at that time. You've got Irenaeus, who is another church father, who is in the year 130 to 202. He has the same opinion as Justin Martyr, and he basically is saying the same thing. But again, the fact that he is referencing Irenaeus, by the way, is Bishop of Lyon, I think in France at that point. So Christianity has already spread to France, which is quite amazing, as early as 202. So it's kind of come from the Middle East as far as France. He was, I think, a bishop there or something. And he says, so Irenaeus says that the end of the present age will be marked by a 3-year reign of the Antichrist, who will desecrate the temple in Jerusalem, meaning that he believes that the temple will be rebuilt. His reign will be cut short by the return of Christ, who will cast him into the lake of fire. At this point, Christ will inaugurate the millennial age, and when the millennium is over, there will be a general resurrection, the final judgment, and the inauguration of the eternal state. Again, the source quote there is Against Heresies. Ijaz, you'll be aware of that. Book 5.30.4. So there's just 3 church fathers that I am aware of. Now, I'm a pastor. I'm not expecting the congregation as a whole to be aware of them. But to say that there is actually no church fathers referring to Revelation is not right. It's really not right.
So, Pastor Stephen, if I just may do a brief response here, it is well and fine that they spoke about this particular belief of in their doctrine, but that does not mean that they're making reference to the book of Revelation. In this case, it is quite likely that this was a debate in the early church, and I accept that totally. We have many references, and you are correct about Papias. I have no doubt about that. In fact, the book I have speaks at length about that. But all it tells us is that Christians debated about about this point, and that yes, eventually a book was written that does debate this point. I would like to imagine that if the church fathers were debating a point of doctrine, they would make reference to the words of scripture and make a determination based on the words of scripture. But in none of the church fathers that you've referenced, from Papias to Irenaeus or anyone else, do they actually quote what the book of Revelation says on this. And I would like to imagine that if they were trying to determine a major doctrine in the faith, the first place to start would be scripture, and they don't. So it's a bit like putting the cart before the horse. Yes, they debated this, but to say they debated it because of the book of Revelation would be an assumption. On the other hand, it could be that a Christian did write the book of Revelation to answer this very question itself and settle the topic. And as you would know, one of the first rules that we learn in biblical exegesis is that we can't show the overimportance of word studies. A word may be used, but that does not mean that that word is the cause of a belief. Rather, it could be that that word is being used because people are debating that belief in and of itself. But thank you for your fantastic contribution on that. I really appreciated it.
Can I respond?
Please do, please.
I would ask you, is there any other book of the Bible that refers to the millennium?
To my knowledge, I don't believe so. But that the book of Revelation is the one to do so does not mean it's the source. It could be the last of the ones to simply add to the conversation. Just like the book of John, in the Johannine prologue, the academic consensus is that a later author pens this, the prologue to the Gospel of John, in order to qualify a point against the Gnostics. That something is included in the text does not necessitate it is the origination of an idea or thought. It could simply be the after effects of a conversation already in progress.
The millennium, most people would say, is sourced. I mean, there's no other evidence that I am aware of that says that the source of the millennium comes from anywhere else other than Revelation 20. I mean, this is one of the debates even among Christians. It's that this is a doctrine that is uniquely sourced in Revelation 20. And just because something is not directly quoted as being said, hey, this is chapter and verse from Revelation, just because it's not a direct quote doesn't mean that something cannot be indirectly referred to. And I think the onus would be on those who would say, no, this is not referring to Revelation at all, to actually substantiate that, when it's clear that, I say, the references are indirect enough but clear enough to Revelation 20. I think
Pastor, yeah, I think you've inverted who the onus is on here, right? So if you sincerely believe that Papias has this belief because of this particular passage and verse, then the onus would be on you to demonstrate that. And like you're doing right now, in order to study the topic, you study the passage, right? I would like to imagine Papias and Irenaeus does the same thing. But it seems to be the case that, and I don't want to misrepresent you yet, just to be clear, you're saying to us that Papias and Irenaeus, these early church fathers, had this verse in mind, but did not have the presence of mind to exegete this passage to determine this doctrine. Is that clear, Pastor?
Well, I think what can be ascertained is, as early as Papias and as early as Irenaeus and the other one, forgotten who I just mentioned, they are clearly, so it's early dates, they are referencing something called the millennium. So you want to say, look, whether you dispute that it comes from the book of Revelation or elsewhere, we have evidence in situ that is saying this thing called the millennium is being debated. Now,
I agree.
Yeah, and so I would say, as church fathers, what is the book or the likely source that they are going to be discussing? Especially as you've already acknowledged, they are trying to refute heretics and Gnostics. The source that they're most likely to quote as church fathers, even indirectly, is going to be the Bible.
But that's the problem, Pastor Stevens. They don't even indirectly quote this passage from Revelation 20, nor do they paraphrase it, nor do they even refer to it. It's silent on it. You see, Pastor, you acknowledge that they would have exegeted this passage to make a decision on the belief, but they don't, not even once. And I would like to imagine that if you had 100 years and you spread from Asia to Europe, there must have been at least one Christian that when exegeting a passage, he would reference it, even if it was a paraphrase or a minor, 3 words about it. But not even that. How is that possible, Pastor?
I think you can refer to, so I can refer to Jesus' sayings without saying this is, for example, Luke chapter 4, verse 5. The fact that I don't say Luke chapter 4, verse 5 doesn't mean that I'm not referencing Luke chapter 4, verse 5.
Well, Pastor, I agree. But do they say that this
the same here
comes from John or the book of Revelation?
But the same here with Irenaeus. It's like, look, their church fathers, their source of all people who are going to be quoting the Bible, even or referencing the Bible, if you don't like the word quote, of all people who are most likely to be referencing the Bible, it's going to be Christians and it's going to be church fathers.
And yet they don't.
I don't think you can even argue that with Irenaeus, when Irenaeus is so particular. So when he says, so let me go back to Irenaeus. He says, the end of the present age will be marked by a 3-year reign of the Antichrist, who will desecrate the temple in Jerusalem. His reign will be cut short by the return of Christ, who will cast him into the lake of fire. I mean, you can go to the lake of fire is so clearly Revelation 20. I mean, Revelation 20 mentions the lake of fire at least 3 times, I think.
Yeah, but Pastor Stephen, that's the problem. They don't say that this is from John or the Apocalypse, which give rise to the belief that the book of Revelation was written as a response to this question by Christians and the doctrines related to it. Let's keep in mind here that the book of Revelation was not considered canonical by all Christians. So even up until the 4th century, this was a matter of debate. And just to be clear here, that the church fathers did not directly or indirectly quote the book of Revelation tells us that there was no authoritative scripture in circulation for them to do so. And I would like to imagine, and I'm sure you agree with me on this, if the church fathers were academics and if they were sincere, any determination about any doctrine must come from an authoritative source. And that authoritative source would be scripture. Yet you can't present to me at least one quote where they make reference to the book of Revelation on this particular point. So I appreciate the answer, but we can't skip the vagaries. Everything you've said to me so far simply indicates that the book of Revelation is written as a response to the question and is not the initiator of the question itself. Is there any evidence that any church father exegeted any writing by John to arrive at their conclusions in terms of this doctrine?
Well, I was going to say, I believe that Irenaeus does that because when you're just kind of saying, he is not just, you have to say, well, why is he being so specific? So where he says, the present age will be marked by a 3-year reign of the Antichrist. It's like, look, where is this coming from? What is fueling the debate here? Now, again, this particular author, this is this one. He's referencing actually Daniel. He doesn't quote that he's referencing Daniel, but Daniel 7, I think it is, which talks about the 77s. It's another apocalyptic literature.
But not prophetic, according to the Jews.
Yes, yeah. And they would, some Jews would accept it, some, as you know, wouldn't.
Not as prophetic, though. It would not fall under Nevi'im, but Ketuvim, the book of Daniel. They don't view it as prophetic at all in the Tanakh. That would be a Christian view, but not Jewish.
Yeah, some would, but they would call it. It's still apocalyptic literature. A Jewish person would recognize it as apocalyptic.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
I don't doubt that.
That's fine. So in Daniel 7, where the reference is to the 7 years, you just think that is clearly an exegesis of Daniel 7. So they are engaged in exegesis here. And you're just thinking, well, if it's exegesis of a book. It's not mere comment. It's not kind of commenting on somebody else. It's exegesis of a text. And so you just think they are, I would argue, I would say that the weight of evidence is that they are exegeting a text. I mean, I leave it to listeners to kind of make up their own mind. I can't present more evidence than I have.
No problem. But just to be clear, the book I did reference said that there was 0 direct quotations of the book of Revelation among any of the early church fathers. And just to be clear here, they do reference authors, like Papias does mention the book of, sorry, he mentions the Apocalypse of John. So he is at least aware of a book by that title. But when he debates the topic of a millennium, he makes no such reference to it, nor does he quote it. Thus, academics agreeing that this is part of the kerugma, the oral tradition perhaps, which exists in the early Christian church, but to say that this is because of the book of Revelation demands evidence, and we can't have assumptions here. I would like to think that Papias was credible enough to exegete scripture, and he simply does not present scripture. Eusebius, when he references Papias, does not present scripture on this point as well. And as you would rightly recall, Eusebius in chapter 3, book 39, I think it's paragraphs 11 to 14, he says that people simply believe Papias because of the age of the man, but he also believed in mythical and absurd things, thus dequalifying him as a reliable witness, historically at least. So I have been thorough on this, but I've enjoyed this conversation thoroughly, Pastor Stevens. May God bless you for the time that you spent with us. And I absolutely enjoyed the references to the books. I'll take a second look at it. Just, if I may ask, it might be a bit personal, but where do you fall in the millennium debate? What camp do you fall into, if I may ask?
So I would be a post-millennial. Can I just correct something I said? I referred to Daniel 7. I actually mean Daniel 9. On the, I mean, Hippolytus also says something. So where they're referring to the midweek, they are in their discussion, in the interpretation of the 70 weeks. Irenaeus and Hippolytus posited a gap between the 69th and the 70th week, which is kind of where this discussion of the millennium comes from. So I would be a kind of post-mill guy myself. I'd probably be in a minority among some, but that's probably a discussion. That's probably a bit of an in-house or more technical discussion.
So I did have a quote here with Hippolytus on his view on the book of Revelation, but I seem to have misplaced it now, so do forgive me. But it's interesting you took that position. Thank you very much, Pastor Stephen.
Yeah. Just a quick question before I let Dr. Imran and Nazam in as well. So you basically what you're saying, Ijaz, is that
I'm definitely not Nazam, but thank you.
I know that. So
I wish I was, mashallah. Those good looks.
Ijaz, basically what you're saying is that the early church fathers, they don't directly quote Revelation, right?
Not me. It's what the academics have.
No, well, the academics that you've read from now.
Christian academics.
Now, do they quote other books in the Bible where there are direct quotes?
Yeah, they're paraphrases, and they actually make reference, like Luke, or they say the evangelist says, referring to John. This is quite frequent in the Nissan fathers, the fathers before the Council of
Nicaea. And would that, from your understanding, and of course the same question to Pastor Stephen, would that be something that they would consistently do? And so does this therefore stand out from what they would normally do?
I've never seen this collection of works by these particular authors say that this book has not been directly quoted. They usually say that for almost all the other 26 books, but this one in particular, there seems to be a strange or odd silence that can't be.
I'll let you come into that, Pastor Stephen, as well. So is that your view as well, Pastor? Obviously, you've got a different view to that, haven't you?
As I'm aware, the direct quotes from Revelation, I think Ijaz is right on that. I would need to go back to some of my other works to see where the first direct quote is made. But I would dispute. I think it is clear enough that these are indirect quotes. Justin Martyr was of the opinion that it was the Apostle John who is writing it. As Ijaz said, you've got an African bishop come along in the 3rd century, Dionysius, who who posits that it's a different John. But again, that will be contrary to the opinion of Justin Martyr, who's quite early. He is right in saying that the revelation, because of its nature, various people were saying, look, can we believe this? Can we not? There is a debate within the church of whether this is canonical or not canonical. And actually, I mean, it does become canon. So, I mean, that, again, I can agree with that. History does show that there is debate about whether it can be accepted or not because of its style. And it is clearly different in style to John's other writings. I think there was one question that was raised before I came on in terms of today. I can't remember whether it was Imran or Ijaz you asked. I think it was Ijaz. You asked churches today. If a church today denied revelation, what would we say? I think the Eastern Orthodox Church, I'm sure that they are not, I don't think they quite like revelation to this day. But otherwise, Orthodox churches, Orthodox is probably the wrong word, but otherwise major churches would accept that revelation is part of the Bible. On your tag, by the way, it's showing Revelations by Paul, so it probably needs to be corrected to Revelation by John, because it looks.
Yeah, I think Ijaz already pointed that out.
Okay.
Pastor Stephen, just one very quick question before I let Imran in. So you're saying that the church fathers do indirectly quote Revelation. Did they routinely directly quote other books in the Bible?
Yes. So, I mean, if you go back to any of those church fathers, Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, Clement of Rome, all of those are early church fathers. Clement of Rome he lived between 30 AD and 100 AD. They would all reference scripture, as in they would refer to scripture, but they wouldn't habitually quote chapter and verse. I mean, sometimes they might, but by no means did they always do so.
No, but quoting directly doesn't necessarily mean or necessitate that you give verse and chapter. You can paraphrase the actual verse where it becomes quite obvious, and that there therefore can still become a direct quote. My question really to you would be that if they were routinely doing that and it was a direct quote, why does this now have to be indirect when it comes to Revelation? What's changed there?
Yeah, no. I would say that even with the church fathers, they don't always make direct quotes, even if they're not quoting, even if they're not saying this chapter and this verse, they're not habitually always doing direct quotes either. So in that sense, again, I haven't got references in front of me. No. But I think you could go back to certainly some of those discussions, especially where they're debating with heretics, etc., or they're having internal discussions. They were saying, well, what do we think Paul or whoever means on this? So, I don't think they habitually do direct quotes. So in that sense, it hasn't particularly struck me as being anomalous, but others might have a different opinion.
Sure. Dr. Imran.
I just want to say, Pastor Stevens, lovely to see you.
Yeah, definitely.
And I've got an apology to make, actually, because I know you've contacted me to organise some discussions, and I've been very remiss at getting back to you. I know I sent you a few messages, and then that sort of petered out. But I'll get back to you, and we'll make time to have them discussions. I really appreciate your input today. It's a breath of fresh air, really, to have somebody come on and engage actually with the topic. And I really appreciate it. It's always wonderful having you, and you're a great example to others on how interaction should happen, and for us as well. So we really appreciate your time.
Well, look, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to my wife, if that's okay, but have a good rest of the discussion.
Fantastic. But do join us again, Pastor Stephen, and maybe we normally start this stream at 9:30. If you get on early, we'll get you on first, because, as I say, we want to get hardened academic, trained people or pastors like yourself who at least they do a lot of extensive reading and they give us a good insight of what their views are. We want it to be more meaningful. Unfortunately, we tend to just get, a lot of the times, not everyone, we do get some very knowledgeable people, but generally it's just people who perhaps are not so grounded. So it's just nice to have you on and have that more deep and sort of more academic sort of discussion. But really wonderful to see you, and regards to your wife as well.
Likewise to all of yours.